A former Canadian Minister of Defense named Paul Hellyer says that he was given classified information that he claims verifies that the Bilderberg Group and the Illuminati are working with alien extraterrestrials in order to rule planet Earth. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, it makes perfect sense that aliens or demons, some sort of supernatural seemingly entity, is probably working with the elite Illuminati. Now, I'm not saying that they're masquerading, and I'm not buying into the reptilian elite that they're here masquerading as humans, but I wouldn't be surprised if they actually are working with the elite Illuminati. Because when these supernatural entities, these demons, would come to planet Earth perhaps thousands of years ago or at any point in time and approached these power-hungry human demons, the presidential powers, these power-tripping banksters, it makes perfect sense that they have taught them how to do these things and are teaching them and preparing planet Earth essentially for the Antichrist to come and rule and then to claim that he is God. So I wouldn't be surprised. I don't usually cover aliens and extraterrestrials. It's just, a lot of it's just too far out there, a lot of just hazy, shady images and a lot of hoaxes. There's a lot of real, tangible issues ranging from Big Brother Orwellian news to war crimes, warmongering, government cover-ups, mainstream media frauds, pop culture, Illuminati idols that I cover. But this is pretty interesting.
And the cabal comprises members of the Three Sisters, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers and the Trilateral Commission, the International Banking Cartel, the Oil Cartel, members of various intelligence organizations, and select members of the military junta, who together have become a shadow government.
And this is not just, some random guy on the internet. This is a former Minister of Defense out of Canada who has criticized Stephen Hawking's stance on extraterrestrials and insists that there are several different kinds of aliens working with, and he mentioned them by name, not just the government, but he mentioned the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, these elite Illuminati organizations. So pretty wild stuff, but it actually makes perfect sense. Whatever you want to call them, aliens or demons, some sort of supernatural, seemingly extraterrestrial entity, it makes perfect sense that they actually are working with the Illuminati. And again, I don't mean to go down the David Icke route of the shape-shifting and that they're posing as human beings. It's a totally separate issue, largely been debunked, a lot of speculation and just people hallucinating, thinking that they're seeing people shape-shift. And there's a lot of explanations for why that wouldn't be the case in most instances. But again, are seemingly supernatural demonic entities working with the Illuminati? Most likely. They're probably just preparing planet Earth for when one of these entities, or a human being, or a cybernetic, transhumanist, cyborg, genetically modified human, or perhaps one of these entities was just going to pop up at some point in time and just declare him that he's God. He's going to say that he's a descendant of Jesus Christ, the hidden bloodline, or that he's, finally returned from, the heavenly realm to finally rule over planet Earth. I mean, that is most likely what all of this is building up to. And see, these entities, if they're working with the government, I mean, they're obviously evil, okay? Because the Illuminati could stop all the wars. These are the people who start the wars based on lies. These are the people who keep people enslaved. These are the people who take advantage of the downtrodden. I mean, they could end world hunger. They could end the world conflicts if they really wanted to. But it's to their benefit to keep the conflicts going, to keep people in poverty, to leech and suck resources out of countries. So the elite Illuminati, if they were good, and if these entities that they're communicating with or that they're working with were actually good, we would already have world peace. We would already have solved the hunger and poverty problems. So be very careful if in some time in the future these entities or an entity pops up on the world scene and just declares, hey folks, he's going to say that he's God. He's going to say that he is the reincarnation of Jesus. That is essentially the final end game of this entire New World Order system. pretty hard to believe, maybe for some, hard to wrap your mind around it, but if you just sit back and you start assembling the pieces of the puzzle, that is what this is all building up to.
Hello, Sid Roth here. Welcome to my world where it's naturally supernatural. Are UFOs real? I mean, for sure. Does the Bible talk about them? Are UFOs involved in end-time Bible prophecy, end-time events? Could they be a little piece of a puzzle that we have missed? My guest, Chuck Missler, says yes. He's a Naval Academy graduate and former branch chief of the Department of Guided Missiles, CEO of 6 public companies. 4 of the 6 were highly classified in the Department of Defense. Chuck Missler, you are such, in my opinion, and I'm entitled to say this, you are such a renowned, wonderful Bible teacher. Are you a little Miss Sugar? What are you talking about? UFOs, flying saucers? I mean, I don't get it.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the intended encouragement, but I really came at this whole subject because of my love for the Bible. It happens that I come out of an information science background. My whole career, 30 years in the strategic community, gives me perhaps a little different perspective than most people would have going at this topic. But I want to right up front indicate it was my biblical interest that brought me into this rather than my high-tech background, although that's proven to be, that and my Department of Defense connections have been very valuable to me. So that's one of the reasons I find myself in this peculiar posture.
But it's not, in other words, he has a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge from the intelligence community, which helps him put a lot together of what we'll be talking about. But he's saying it's his love for the Bible that is really motivating him right now. So you found a controversial verse in Genesis 6, which has to do with a prophecy that Jesus said.
Let's start with, I start with Jesus, and in Matthew 24, he gives 4 disciples an inside briefing on a second coming. And in that briefing, he makes a very strange remark. He says, as the days of Noah were, so shall the days of the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, many people presume he just meant that it was because of the business as usual. So anyway, the point is,
right,
we need to understand what the days of Noah were like in order to understand what he was saying. So that takes us to Genesis 6, and when you jump into Genesis 6, you quickly discover that very few seminaries teach what that passage really says. And so the first, as you get into that Genesis 6, you have to understand the first 2 verses are one sentence, and it deals with this strange goings-on between the fallen angels producing hybrids with humans. And that was so uncomfortable in the early years of the church that it was the understanding of the early rabbis. It was also the understanding of the early church that what it was dealing with was fallen angels cohabiting with human women, producing a strange hybrid offspring. But when you get to about the 5th century, that was a very uncomfortable posture. So they cooked up this, what they call the lines of Seth argument, and that's what's taught in most seminaries. One of the things I discover is that many people who are seminary products of most seminaries haven't been taught that there are different perspectives of Genesis 6, and it's the literal, careful study version of Genesis 6 that starts to raise the fog on this whole issue.
Now tell me about the word Nephilim. What does that mean?
In the Hebrew, it comes from the verb nephal. It means the fallen ones, and that's the term used. Don't confuse that with the fallen angels. The fallen angels, according to Genesis 6, cohabited with human women to produce a hybrid offspring that are called in the Hebrew the Nephilim. In the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, the translation of the Old Testament into Greek, they use the word gigantes, which is transliterated giants, right, and they did happen to be giants, but that's not what the word means. The word actually means, in the Greek, the earthborn. And so, from the Greek point of view, they're earthborn. From the Hebrew point of view, they're the fallen ones. But either way, they're pointing to a hybrid, and it apparently was part of Satan's plan to contaminate the Messianic line.
But so the purpose of the flood was to get rid of these.
Exactly.
People.
That's exactly the point. You study verse 9 of Genesis 6. It speaks of Noah that his genealogy was untainted, unblemished. And apparently it was a distinctive in that sense. He may not have been the only one unblemished, but the fact that he was unblemished qualified him for what God was going to do, among other things. But the point is, the whole issue that God chose to do was to save 8 people in the ark and erase the blackboard, so to speak.
Okay, but if the blackboard was erased, then we don't have to fool with them today, if they were all destroyed.
Except Genesis 6 verse 4 says there were Nephilim in the land in those days, comma, and also after that. And we discover, many good Bible scholars miss this, that you really won't understand subsequent events in the Old Testament by not realizing it happened again. When God in Genesis 15 and Genesis 17 confirms the land covenant to Abraham, he tells Abraham that he and his descendants are going to be away for 400 years, but after 400 years, they're going to return. That gave Satan, who's obviously listening, the realization that he had 4 centuries to lay down a minefield. And that's why when Moses enters the land and he sends his at Kadesh Barnea, he sends in the 12 reconnoiters, if I can call them that. They come back and say, and Numbers 13, verse 33 says they were Nephilim in the land. So it happened again.
I'll tell you what, hold that thought. Did you know that a dozen astronauts have reported UFOs? Don't go away, we'll be right back. Hello, Sid Roth here with Chuck Missler. And Chuck, so many astronauts are reporting UFOs, but one was amazing. This one astronaut, John Blaha, a ham radio operator, actually picked up what he was saying. As a matter of fact, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Let's take a look at that now.
The wording is as follows. Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under observance.
I have a question for you. Why is there so much misinformation? Why are there so many cover-ups? I mean, when astronauts are reporting UFOs, what is the reason, in your opinion, for the misinformation, the cover-up? I
would be conjecturing, like most people, one of the great mysteries in this whole area is why the cover-ups by all the governments, but most by the United States. Other countries are starting to release those information, but in the United States, there is a deliberate attempt to hide this area, and that's probably the biggest mystery. Isn't this one? The biggest one is Roswell. Why is the Roswell incident back in 1947 enjoy a higher level of classification than our most sensitive warheads?
You're from the intelligence community. You should tell me. Well, it makes no sense. I agree.
And it's a mystery. I don't have a conjecture as to why they're doing it, but it's clear 2 presidents and 4 congressmen have been unable to crack the security that surrounds the Roswell incident. Why? That was 60 years ago. And that's the mystery. Obviously, there's all kinds of bizarre stories that have come out of that experience. But the real mystery to me isn't that. The real mystery is, why is it classified? Why does the government hide it? And I don't have any conjectures. I think those conjectures are just as wild as the other conjectures about the UFOs.
According to your tapes, this cover-up is very unusual because some 30 newspapers reported it in 47, and then just immediately after, what happened?
Yeah, Blanchard, the colonel of the base, when the Roswell thing first happened, issued a press release that a saucer had landed and so forth. Within a few hours, 400 miles away, the Brigadier General in charge of the 8th Air Force countermanded that press release and hatched this story about it was a weather balloon and so forth. That starts a whole series of the silliest, most inane cover-up stories. There's been a sequence of them. First it was a weather balloon. Well, that didn't fly. They went one after the other. And to the community, it's almost insulting because the cover-up stories are so empty, so foolish, so ridiculous.
But what about that new technique, digital imaging?
Yeah, it's interesting that when Brigadier General Ramey made his press release countermanding Blanchard's, the press took pictures. Many years later, just a few years ago, a guy by the name of Johnson who took the picture, we were able to get the negatives, and by using advanced digital analysis of the negatives, they were able, an analyst by the name of Rudiak was able to use advanced information techniques to unravel some words that were on the memo that was in Ramey's hand. And it speaks of the victims and the disc that crashed. In other words, this
actually calls it not a plane, a disc.
A disc that crashed, and there are victims, implying. See, the stories have always said there were 4 bodies, 3 were dead, 1 was still alive. That was the unconfirmed rumors that we heard. Well, it turns out that that memo, that unraveling, is regarded as the smoking gun because it demonstrates that the Air Force has been lying all along.
Well, these UFOs, they defy laws of physics. Your degree is in physics,
yes,
I believe.
Well, yes. The thing that is the fundamentals, we want to get right at that. I'm sorry, presuming a lot here on your audience. The UFOs have 2 problems. The one problem is they are tangible. They show up on multiple radars. They leave physical evidence, burnt ground and radioactivity and so forth. So they're tangible. They're not hallucinations. Radar sets don't have hallucinations. Okay.
Right.
On the other hand, they make right-angle turns at exotic speeds. They go faster than the speed of sound without sonic booms. They do things that seem to violate physical laws, and yet they are physical in one sense, and yet they're not physical in another. Now, the other area we need to just acknowledge is this is the toughest area to research, because not only because of all the hoaxes and all the crackpots that are in this area, is because of the deliberate disinformation by the government trying to hide these areas. But the net reality is Jacques Vallée, the Frenchman, and J. Allen Hynek, the American, are probably the 2 most of the early pioneers, the 2 most reputable researchers. They both came to the conclusion that these things are hyperdimensional. They're not extragalactical. That's a very fundamental insight, by the way, because they seem to pose to being something that they're not. But the real point is that we're dealing here with a phenomenon that bridges the physical reality we understand and a reality that's outside that. One of the things we've discovered just in the last few years is that some of the constants of physics are changing that we thought were constant. And Scientific American, in June of 2005, ran an article in which they pointed out if the constants of physics are changing, that implies that our physical reality is actually a subset, a shadow of a larger reality. And when you start dealing in the UFO area, that's one of the other demonstrations that there is a hyperdimensional aspect to this.
And you actually, from your research, believe that some of the people that report they've been abducted is actually true.
That is the spookiest side of this whole area, and probably the classic author in this area is Dr. John Mack, head of psychiatry for Harvard Hospital. He's written a book on this whole area. Clearly, and there was a conference at MIT on this whole subject. There are enormous numbers of people. Some estimates are between over 1% of the population, maybe as high as 2 or 3%, claim to have had an experience which involves being abducted by these vehicles or whatever. And now their stories are too bizarre to accept on the one hand. On the other hand, when you profile these people, they're above average intelligence, no prior psychiatric history, clearly subject to some serious trauma, and not anxious. They're almost trying to hide the stories rather than reveal them.
And their stories are similar. That's the thing that's so amazing.
They're united by some common threads. In fact, that was Mack's challenge to the conference at MIT. He says, if what these people say is happening isn't happening, what is happening? Because these stories all have common links that are spooky.
I'll tell you what, hold that thought. When we come back, we're going to talk about how these UFOs tie in with end times. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Hello, Sid Roth here with Chuck Missler. And Chuck, the only reason you're involved in this is it's a missing ingredient, a missing piece, something that no one looks at in the end times, these UFOs. Are these Are these people around today, in your opinion, these descendants of the Nephilim?
I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Well, not necessarily as descendants directly, because I think that's been dealt with. But I think there's,
okay.
but at the same time, I do suspect that the UFOs are in effect a modern day echo, if you will, and that may be what Jesus was talking about when he says, "As the days of Noah were." That there's he's implying a parallelism, and so that's why we got interested in this in the first place. And if that's true, we can test it very simply, because if we're correct, these events are going to increase as we get increasingly closer to what we call the end times.
Okay, there's an allusion to this that's, I mean, it really grabbed me when you explained it on my radio show from Daniel.
Yes, oh, exactly. In Daniel chapter 2, we have the famous image of Nebuchadnezzar, and as he goes through it, the mystery is the iron mixed with clay. And when Daniel goes to explain what the miry clay is, he says, "As for the miry clay, comma, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men." Now, I've had the exegetical experts confirm this. The they, he shifts to a personal pronoun, but the they has to be something other than the seed of men in order for them to mingle with this. Just grammatically, it requires that. So that leads to a speculation. What are we talking about here? One of the possibilities is that we're dealing here with something that's not the seed of men, namely Nephilim, hybrids. And that's a hint there that there will be a proliferation of hybrids at the end times, because that's what Daniel's talking about. So that's a staggering verse to deal with.
You know, one of the fascinating things I find in your 2 CDs that we're making available is you talk about Joshua's assignment to destroy all the people in particular areas that a lot of people wonder about.
Yeah, when you read that as a New Testament reader, you're shocked, because God tells Joshua to wipe out every man, woman, and child of 4 key tribes. And that shocks, the New Testament reader, because we don't understand that there is a gene pool problem again. We understand Genesis 6, the flood of Noah, was dealing, among other things, with a gene pool problem in the human predicament. What we don't realize is that Satan had again laid down a minefield in Canaan, because when he found out from God's revelation to Abraham that his descendants would be away and then return after 400 years, that gave Satan 400 years to lay down a minefield. When you study the book of Judges geographically, you discover that they didn't follow through in certain areas to wipe out their instructions. The places they missed was a place called Bashan. We call that the Golan Heights today. There's other areas, the central part, that we would call Judea and Samaria, but now it's called the West Bank.
West Bank,
and
right.
There's the third area, a place called Gaza. And you stand back from that and you realize those areas where they failed to follow through in the book of Judges are the same areas that are under dispute today. And you begin to realize that there's a demon overlay on human history here that we need to understand.
Now that's my next question. In your opinion, are we talking about aliens from foreign planets, or are we talking about demons?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that even J. Allen Hyde and Jacques Vallée concluded they're not intergalactical for a number of good physical reasons. We believe they're hyperdimensional, they're demonic. They also pretend to be something they're not. That means that one of their tools is deceptions. And so that gives us a perspective of where they stand biblically. I believe that they are real today and that they are demonic in their root purpose. And so that creates a danger to anyone that isn't tutored in this area. And that's one reason that we include it in our materials in terms of our own spiritual hygiene. So,
well, there were over a dozen astronauts that have reported to UFOs, and one astronaut in particular, his name is Dr. Edgar Mitchell. Mm-hmm. He's appealing that the files be open. Let's take a look at that.
Okay.
And what I am suggesting is it is now time to put away this embargo of truth about the alien presence. And I call upon our government to open up like other governments have, and you will hear about that this morning, like the Belgians have, the French have, the Brazilians have, the Argentines, the Mexicans have all released their files. It's about time now that we do the same thing and become a part of this planetary community.
That is so amazing to me, Chuck. Are we going to open up our files or not?
And the very fact there's resistance is alarming. You'd think that there's nothing to hide, they would open it up. So the question that really, you can only speculate, you only feed speculation the way they're operating, keeping it secret.
Okay, former President Reagan, you were telling me about an amazing, amazing statement he made about UFOs.
Well, that they may be the ingredient that it may take to get the world together. But on the presidential side, there have been 2 presidents that have tried to crack the security and couldn't, and 4 congressmen. So we need to put pressure.
So what is going to happen when the President of the United States says there are UFOs, we're being invaded, there's going to be a one-world government, and, I mean, there we are, end-time prophecy.
It looks like it's very easy to see how this could have a major role in setting the stage if we understand the classical biblical scenario. And that's one reason when you go at this area, your primary study should be to understand what the Bible has said all along is the destiny of man and the history, the forward history of governments. And so as we watch every day, that as we look at our newspaper and see where the world is going, not just in this area, the whole geopolitical horizon is converging. The more you know about your Bible, and the more you know about what's really going on in the geopolitical horizon, the more you see the convergence. We're plunging in to the climax of human history.
Based on all of your Bible study, all your research, where's America right now?
Well, America is in deep trouble. The America you and I grew up in, I believe, is over. I think that the most common question I get asked as I travel and have question and answer sessions is, where's America in prophecy? And all the end-time players in eschatology are well identified in the Bible, and they're there. America's conspicuous by not being. The other question I always get asked is, why hasn't God judged America? Billy Graham quipped several decades ago.
Well, listen, we have a few seconds left in this show. We don't know when the end's going to, we don't know the day or hour. Make Jesus your Lord. Get to know him intimately. Let God say, I want to be your friend. He's speaking it to you now. Hello, Sid Roth here. Welcome to my world, where it's naturally supernatural. Last week, we found out about these amazing prophecies buried in the Vatican. 900 years ago, what would happen to each pope all the way up to the last pope. On this show, we're going to continue, and we're going to talk about the Vatican's secret plans for welcoming an alien God with a small g under the reign of the last pope. Well, last week we talked about the Saint Malachi. And Chris, I have to ask you, does the Pope know about these prophecies? Do the cardinals know about these prophecies? What do they think of them?
Well, Sid, there's actually a lot of evidence that they do take it very seriously. In fact, Pope Pius XII, who was the Pope during World War II, he actually produced a documentary film about himself, and the title of the film is the Malachi motto for his papacy, Angelic Shepherd. He actually titled the film after the Malachi prophecy's prediction for him. So he not only endorsed it, he claimed it.
Okay, Tom, as just a short review, what, based on the prophecies out of the Vatican that were hidden for all these generations, are they anticipating with the final pope?
Well, the idea among both Catholics and Protestant scholars is that he will be the final pope. He is the one who is going to be residing over the Vatican as it enters into the Great Tribulation period. And there's also the belief among even some of the Catholic mystics that he might be a false pope, an anti-pope, somebody who helps give rise to the Antichrist.
Let me tell you something. Judaism, Christianity, and other religions have focused on the year 2012. You know, remember the Mayan prediction, the end of the world in 2012? So everyone's discounted all of that, but that's not exactly what the prediction said. What did it say?
in the conferences where I spoke last year, I kept telling people, don't say it's the end of the world. That's not what the Maya said. That's not what the Aztecs said. That's not what the Cherokee Indians said, all of whose calendar rolled over at the end of 2012. What was it that they were saying? They were saying 2012 was the end of an era, and 2013 marks a new dispensation. Now, the Maya said some things that were very interesting. They said it would be marked by the emergence of two great male figures who would emerge upon the earth. They sound very much like they're talking about the false prophet and the Antichrist. They talked about their god Bolyon Yakteku, the spirit of it, coming up from out of the underworld. Now, what does this god do? He guards the bones and the seed of the giants that are in the underworld, and that spirit would begin to rise in the year 2013, giving birth even to a new form of humanity.
You're talking about what I've read about and pondered so many times in the Bible. Maybe you've read this about the Nephilim, where the sons of God cohabited with the daughters of humans and produced great giants. That's what it sounds like to me.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And furthermore, turn-of-the-century preachers, including Jonathan Edwards, marked the year 2012 to 2016 as the date when the false prophet and the Antichrist would appear. Dozens of Protestant reformers marked these years hundreds of years ago. Not only that, and you appreciate this with your Jewish ministries, the Zohar, one of the most important books of Jewish Kabbalah ever written.
It is accepted in traditional Judaism as coming from God. It's not all from God, I can tell you as a fact, but it's an interesting situation that it talks about.
In a section of the Zohar called Signs Heralding Mashiach, the Coming of the Messiah, they marked the year 5773, which in the Jewish calendar began in September 2012 and comes through into this year 2013, and said that was the time. In fact, much of the prophecy sounds almost identical to the prophecy of the popes. It is a time that will lead to the destruction of Rome, and more importantly, they said, at that time Messiah will begin making himself known to the nations of the world. This 700 years ago prophesied that between 2012 to 2013, the emergence of the Messiah would appear on earth, almost an identical parallel to cultures around the world that for thousands of years saw these dates specifically as the time when the end times would begin.
Speaking of end times, many of you are familiar with the apparitions of Mary and Fatima and people going there and being healed, but it's not exactly the way we've been told, is it, Chris?
No, it's not. What would happen if there was a massive UFO sighting? Well, what happened in Fatima, Portugal in 1917 was really just that, in my opinion. Now, up to 70,000 people gathered in a field, supposedly to see an apparition of the Virgin Mary. But if you go and read the descriptions of what people call the miracle of the sun, they actually describe seeing a gray, silvery disc rotating around in the sky and kind of putting a cascade of colors, like a rainbow of colors. And so it really, in 1917, no one had vocabulary of words like flying saucer.
Right.
But that's exactly what it sounds like they're describing to me.
Yeah, I've always thought Mary just appeared in the sky.
It really wasn't Mary at all. They're talking about a sphere or a silver disc.
And that same flying saucer, let's call it for what it is, demonic. According to my notes here, in 1950, Pope Pius XII saw the same thing. Explain.
Well, what's interesting about the Marian dogmas, and all these things that we don't see in the Bible, is that the theology has sort of escalated over time. Now, in 1950, Pope Pius saw a sphere over the Vatican gardens, the same sort of thing that you hear about at Fatima. Now, this sighting of this opaque sphere, flying saucer, UFO, inspired him to define a new doctrine that all Catholics have to believe, and that is that Mary ascended into heaven just like Jesus does in Acts chapter 1.
Wait till you find their research of what the Vatican is ready to announce in reference to end time Bible prophecy and in reference to aliens coming to planet Earth. We'll be right back. I'll tell you, as far as I'm concerned, I'm being blown out of the water, and a lot of my end time thinking is the whole paradigm is changing in light of the Bible prophecy that you're bringing to us. Tell me about the Vatican Conference of a gathering of scientists to discuss extraterrestrial activity.
Certainly. In 2009, the Vatican sponsored an astrobiology conference.
And that means?
That is the study of life in space. Now, what makes that interesting is that we don't really know of any life in space, yet our universities have programs where you can study this. They had the top secular scientists in the world come to Rome for this conference in 2009. We're talking about, atheists, secular scientists, and the sort of topics that they're covering, things like shadow life, exoplanets.
What's an exoplanet?
An exoplanet is a planet that's outside of our solar system.
Okay.
So you have the top scientists in the world gathering in Rome for the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, an audience for the Pope to study life in space.
Speaking of studying life in space, how about life on Earth? Tom, tell me about the hybrid humans.
This is one of the things that I didn't even expect would arrive in our study. There is academics who actually believe that there is a hybridity program that is going on right now. And this took me on a kind of a long journey that brought me back to one question, Sid, and that is why in ancient days when the giants, the first original hybrid humans, right, when they were created by fallen angels and were upon the earth, what was their mission, what was their program? It also had to do with hybridity, and it also had to do with misleading and misguiding and even challenging God himself. But notice that the oldest descriptions of those giants, how tall they were, 20 feet, 30 feet. They would be easy to pick up, right? There's a movie out there right now, Jack the Giant Slayer, and it's kind of based on that mythos that exists in every culture around the world. They tell the story, the gods came down, the gods mingled themselves with humans. They took human genetics, animal genetics. They created a hybrid body. Now the question is, down through time, the Bible tells us there were giants in those days and also after that. So now we get past the flood and you have the Og, the king of Bashan. What is he, 12 feet tall? He's certainly not 20 or 30. And it looks to me like there was an intentional breeding down in size of these hybrid humans until today they could possibly be walking among us and we might not even know that we see them. There are academics who actually believe now that they are walking among us, that they're even in government. Now, that sounds astonishing. Sounds like a sci-fi movie, right?
It does. In fact, why is Hollywood glamorizing all these things at the same time?
Well, that's exactly right. So is that part of a setup? Are there occultists in Hollywood that have an agenda to try to help prepare humanity for what could be a kind of great deception?
Genesis 6:9 talks about Noah. Explain that.
Our research led us to believe that something that happened in ancient days could be occurring even now as we speak. And when I say ancient days, I'm talking about the days of Noah, a time when all of the ancient records from around the world tell us that very powerful angels came down and they mingled with humans and with animals.
The best record is the Bible. The Nephilim is what he's talking about. Go ahead.
Absolutely, the Nephilim. And it was a period of time in which only Noah, and therefore by extension his children, were found, according to the Old Testament, perfect. When you study why the great flood came, the scripture makes it very clear that it happened because all flesh, both man and beast, had been corrupted. So something was happening in ancient days that had to do with the genetic degradation of God's creation.
What does it mean when it says in the Torah about Noah that he was perfect?
Yes, this is the Hebrew word temyem. Means it's the same phrase that's used to describe an unblemished sacrificial lamb. It's talking about genetics. It's talking about his DNA had not been corrupted, as evidently the rest of the world had been by that time. So there was a saturation, an intermarriage between angels and humans, and then through intermarriage this was spreading over hundreds of years until finally, by the time we reach Noah, he's the last specimen left that has a genetic makeup, his DNA, as God had made it. And therefore, you understand why God has to send this flood to wipe out all of this contaminated forms of life and sent this judgment in the days of Noah. Now, Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah.
Oh, yes. Tell me this. In the parable of the wheat and the tares, the weeds, the wheat and the weeds, the Messiah said, let them grow up together. Don't pull them out. I'm wondering if that's the difference between those whose DNA has not been corrupted and those whose DNA has been corrupted, perhaps through a hybridization process of these aliens. What do you think?
You know, Sid, behind the scenes right now, this question is unfolding among academics in a way that you can't even possibly imagine, where they're asking the question, have we concluded that hybrids are among us? And if hybrids are among us, can they even be saved? This is a complex question that's being raised by theologians right now. Isn't that an astonishing thing?
What's even more astonishing to me is the Vatican's secret plan for welcoming in an alien God with a small g. We'll be right back. I'll tell you what, very few Christians, Protestants or Catholics, understand what you're about ready to understand right now. But there are secret plans for welcoming. The Vatican will welcome in this alien from another planet as God. Tell me about that.
Well, Sid, you know, when you look at Bible prophecy and it talks about a one world government and a one world religion, you know, you see how divided the world still is. And, you know, we have to think that something unprecedented is going to occur that would unite the world under one heading like that. Now, Ronald Reagan gave a speech to the United Nations where he said how quickly our differences would be resolved if we were faced with an alien threat from outside this world. I mean, this is in the 80s. He gave this speech in the UN. Now, if you look around the world, what people believe, I mean, statistics in the United States say around 50% of Americans already think that UFOs are aliens visiting the Earth. Now, there was a recent poll in the United Kingdom. More people believe in extraterrestrials in the UK than God, okay? And that's a fact. And so to me, the strong delusion is already here. The groundwork has been laid. And our hypothesis is these powers and principalities that Paul writes about in Ephesians 6, these demonic forces have seeded this idea into the world, so we are primed and ready for a deception.
Okay, but what makes you think the Vatican has planned to announce this?
Well, you know, they're having astrobiology conferences. They've made it intellectually virtuous to believe in these extraterrestrials. Their writings coming out of their theologians have pretty much made the argument that if you don't believe in extraterrestrials, then that is actually the heresy.
You talk about that the Vatican is going to reevaluate their position on basic Christianity. What do you mean by that?
Well, their theologians have written that they think that these entities will be evangelizing us, that they think the chances are that they're not fallen and we are, so that we would have to modify our beliefs according to their revelation.
So are they talking about setting up teams to evangelize humans and aliens? Is that what you're really talking about?
Well, if you get on the internet right now, you'll find
and baptize them?
Hundreds of articles from the Vatican astronomers talking about baptizing extraterrestrials.
100 years ago, our top wonderful theologians had predictions based on their study of Scripture. Tell me about Hawkins Pember that wrote about the days of Noah 100 years ago.
George Hawkins Pember was writing in the 19th century, and he found parallels between what he saw in the days of Noah and his age. And, you know, he pulled out 7 parallels, and there were things like the church marrying itself to the world. Well, and I went through his list and then compared it to where we are now. Now, everything that he saw in the 19th century has just, you know, exponentially grown. I mean, you look at like the church married to the world. Now we have mainline denominations ordaining homosexual clergy and putting them up as their leadership.
But they saw this 100 years ago. It was coming.
He did, and the 7th thing on his list was actually the appearance of these entities, and he called them from the prince of the power of the air, which is what Paul calls Satan in Ephesians chapter 2. Now, the demonic realm in the New Testament worldview was the atmosphere above the earth.
Now, tell me a couple other points that he saw.
Well, Pember saw a vast population increase, for one. Now, our population has grown by leaps and bounds since something he couldn't even imagine. He saw a confusion of gender roles. He was talking about it in the 19th century.
Does that sound familiar to you? It sounds familiar to me.
I don't think he would even have any, inkling of how far that's gone now. I mean, now we have transsexuals, we have, homosexual marriages.
What did he say about holiness?
He saw that there was an emphasis on God being benevolent to the extent that they denied his holiness. Now, I think that we see this in this idea of pluralism, which is so popular in our culture, where all religions point to the same God. And this is a really acceptable notion in today's society. Like, to talk about hell or eternal punishment or the exclusivity of our Messiah, Yeshua, is the thing that most people don't tolerate.
But you see, all these things the Bible says is black and white. They've got to be watered down for there to be a one-world religion, for people to welcome in an antichrist. I mean, what a setup. Even one of the things that he prophesied that you just brought up is a lack of holiness, a lack in belief that there is a hell, a lack in belief that there's even a devil. And, some of these things are surfacing right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I even quoted some of the Catholic theologians at Notre Dame who deny that Satan is a real personal power. I mean, they just see him as some sort of abstraction or metaphor for evil.
I want you to tell me the strongest thing in all of your research, and you've done, both of you have done extensive research. I want each of you to tell me the strongest thing you found in your research.
Well, as I'm listening right now to you and Chris talking, the strongest thing that's in my mind is what Vatican experts have told us. When Father Malachi Martin was asked, why do they have a presence on Mount Graham? And one of the things we haven't had time to talk about is Mount Graham is sacred to the Apache. It is a stargate through which they've, for centuries, have seen creatures that come, that move back and forth.
Now, this is right in Arizona.
This is in Arizona. And in fact, their creation mythos is that a disc came down and a bearded guy in the disc, who was the father of creation, was what established Mount Graham as a holy mountain. Well, anyway, when Malachi Martin was asked, why is the Vatican on Mount Graham? What are they doing up there? He said that they're using their telescope to watch something. And when he was pressed on the question, he said it's because at the highest levels of the Vatican governance, they know what is approaching the earth, and it will be of the utmost importance in coming years. They're literally watching something with the Lucifer device that is approaching planet Earth now.
And what do you believe they're looking for?
I think that they could be deceived. I think they're watching something and they think it's one thing, and I think it's something else. Lucifer, I think it's Satan. I think Jesus said, I beheld Satan as lightning falling from heaven. He has to do with the power of the air. And of course, when Pope Benedict stepped down not long ago, twice lightning struck the top of the St. Peter's Basilica. And this goes back to their belief system. In Romanism, the belief was that the God would tell you when somebody should step down and when a new king should be elected. It was called augurism, and it's where we take the word inaugural or inauguralism for the placement of a new king.
I'll tell you what, as the kids say, you're blowing my mind, but you've got to make Jesus your Lord. Believe he forgave you of your sins. Believe he's your Lord. Welcome him inside now. I'm interrupting this telecast with a special announcement. We have a new Pope, St. Francis. According to the Malachi prophecy, he had to be a Roman. Did you know that this new Pope's parents were from Italy, Roman? Not only that, he's the first Jesuit to ever be Pope. And as you've just heard, the Jesuits are involved with the aliens. You're going to hear a new, a unique, and I believe accurate revelation explaining the mark of the beast. I can tell you, I have never heard this before. Hello, Sid Roth here with L.A. Marzulli in L.A. I am so intrigued with these people that are being interviewed that say they've been abducted. Tell me about this doctor you spoke to, Dr. Lear, who started out as a skeptic of this whole phenomena. He's a surgeon.
Yes.
Tell me about him.
Well, Lear was asked by a friend to go in and look at this patient who claimed to have some sort of a implant or whatever, something under his skin. And, you know, first Lear just figured it was probably a wire or maybe a BB from childhood accident or something. But when he found out that the person was claiming to have been abducted by so-called aliens, he did an about-face and walked out of the room. Didn't want anything to do with this stuff. And in some ways, who could blame him? So he goes in reluctantly. He's sort of persuaded to come back and at least just look at the thing. Looks at the x-rays. Yes, there seems to be something there. So he decides to operate. He goes in. And to his absolute astonishment, what he discovers is a very small metallic implant. But over this implant, and this is obviously a magnification, I'll use my fist, is a secretion, a membrane of some sort. And he takes his scalpel and he tries to cut this membrane and he can't cut it. He then takes a forceps and goes in and yanks this thing out. And it comes out sometimes, he's done 16 of these things since, but it comes out sometimes in 2 or 3 pieces. What he's discovered is when you take these things out and you put them in a petri dish of the patient's blood, and you just let them, and the pieces are, let's say, separated by a half an inch or an inch. Come back 24, 40 hours later, the pieces have tried to assemble themselves. How is that possible? These implants are giving out a clock speed of a frequency, which we believe is a sawtooth, which means it's a computer wave. It's a clock speed at 300 gigahertz, which is 100 times faster than the fastest computer we have on the planet. Inside these things are carbon nanotubes not found in nature. And other compartments, we have no idea what they're doing. But I asked Lear, I said, in your professional opinion, what do you think this implant is? And in sort of a gruff, and I'll do my best imitation, he goes, well, it's changing the person's DNA. But that's what he believes. And that
Did you hear that? It's literally going to change a person's DNA. This sounds way beyond robots and way beyond any science fiction things I've ever seen. What is the source, in your opinion? Are there really flying saucers?
Well, there's 2 paradigms a person can embrace. One is the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that these are entities from the Pleiadian star system or Zeta Reticuli, or, you know, pick your poison, and they're coming here. They are our overlords. I call it the coming great deception, that they've decided to, that they created all life on this planet. They genetically manipulated early man. They started our civilizations. Now they're back at this critical juncture in human history to usher mankind into a time of peace, prosperity, and knowledge.
The science fiction people go that way.
Right. The New Ages go that way.
All right. What's your
I believe that they're interdimensional beings. They are highly malevolent. They are pernicious. They are evil. They have an agenda. It goes back to what we read in the book of Genesis, Genesis 6. The sons of God, the Benai Elohim, the fallen angels, saw the daughters of men. It chose for them wives, and the hybrid was a Nephilim. Isn't it interesting that Yeshua says, as in the days of Noah, so it will be when the Son of Man returns? Why is he signaling the days of Noah to us? Why is he pointing to the days of Noah? Because something happened there that is unlike any other time in all of history, and that is the presence of the fallen angels openly presenting themselves on the earth, and I think we're moving into that time.
You've investigated, so I don't think there's ever been a time in planet Earth there's been so many different supernatural phenomena, and most people have not seen the evil or the good, the God or the demonic. So they're setting themselves up for a big fall. He has an understanding of the mark of the beast I have never heard before, and it rings true. I think it's historic what you're going to share. Will you do that right now?
I'd love to. Thank you for allowing me to do this. We see in Matthew 24, Yeshua states something, as in the days of Noah, so it will be when the Son of Man returns. Alluded to that before. What differentiates those days are the presence of the fallen angels. But there's also some other dynamics in that passage which we overlook. One of them in particular is the length of lifespan. 5, 6, 7, 900 years old people lived, and I believe that's literal. They lived to 900 years or older, okay? Hold that thought, then jump over to the book of Revelation. It says, and we all get this one, that anyone who takes this mark will not be able to buy, sell, or trade. That's an easy one, right? But then we find out that anyone who takes this mark, whatever this thing is, grievous sores will appear over the body. Then we find out in the book of Revelation also, anyone who takes the mark is immediately thrown into the lake of fire. There's no grace. There's no mercy. It's just, you've got the mark, bam, you're in a lake of fire. Not my words. Those are the words of Yeshua, and those are in the book of Revelation. A little further on, we read something which is not necessarily tied into the mark of the beast, but here's the deal. It says that in those days, the days of the mark, men and women will seek death and not find it. How can that possibly be? I've held the chip from Dr. Lear in my hand. I've asked him point blank, what is this thing doing? It's changing the DNA. This thing, and this is how they're going to do it.
This is the chip that people that go into flying saucers have the surgery.
These are the prototypes.
By the way, did this doctor find that these people were loonies?
No, not at all. All these people that have been abducted, most of them, I would say well over 90%, do not want any notoriety. In fact, they seek anonymity. They're not interested in any type of publicity. They just want the thing out.
Why doesn't the U.S. reveal all the information they have on flying saucers? Other nations have done it.
Well, the other nations have done it. Greece, the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, Germany, Japan, Mexico, Brazil. They've all released, I should say, what were at one time top secret documents. We don't do it, and I think the reason is simply this. They fear some sort of a backlash, religious backlash. What happens if people all of a sudden find out that maybe the God we've all believed in isn't? This is what I call, said, the coming great deception. And I believe it's been orchestrated for thousands of years.
Let's go back to this changing the DNA.
Okay.
Why would someone want a chip inside of them?
Here's the scenario. Let's say there's a war, upcoming war in the Middle East, and we see some sort of a nuclear holocaust. Remember, this is just a scenario, okay? So we see a nuclear event in the Middle East, perhaps in this country, and all of a sudden, mile-wide UFOs begin to manifest, begin to appear all over this planet. How is that going to affect everyone? But they'll come with two things. They'll come with a free energy source, and they will come with a chip, and this goes right back into what Matthew 24 states. They will come with this implant, which when you take it, will bring you into, as a member of the New World Order, okay? And when they scan this thing, not only will have its medical records, but it will change and correct your DNA. That's what we'll be told.
So in other words, you'll live longer, I guess.
You'll live to 500 years disease-free. All this. So
who's going to say no? Only someone that knows the Lord.
Exactly.
Only. And you can see why they'd be enemies of the world.
We'd be looked at as Neanderthals. How can you possibly believe in this ridiculous mythos of a Judeo-Christian God? Why not just take this mark and live disease-free for 500 years? It sounds like a great deal. And I've held it in my hand, and this is what I think it's coming, and it's the only thing which fulfills all that criteria which we just spoke about that's found in the book of Revelation.
And as far as timing, isn't it interesting in this whole scenario of what we see shaping up right now of the nations coming against Israel is on the horizon with Obama's name in the secret code? It shows you how soon it'll be that the Messiah is going to return.
Hi, my name is Lee Patrick Hanks, and I'm here with the Exopolitics Conference in Washington, D.C., April the 17th, 2009. We have a very special guest today here, a part of our New World Integration and Tower 13 network, Dr. Roger Lear, a podiatrist, and also gentleman has been working with the ANS research group on one of the most fascinating subjects that's been a part of my personal life because of my extraterrestrial experiences, and that has to do with the abduction phenomenon and the possibilities of alien implants. And I'm been looking for someone like this gentleman for many, many years. So it's very synchronistic that we are sitting here today after a lot of my work over the last several years has been getting to the core of actually having someone validate implants, the fact that they are real, and that you've got the actual evidence to prove it. So tell us a little bit how you got to this, if you would, and what you found so far.
Well, most of my endeavors in this vein have come to me kind of synchronistically and without going in through a lot of detail. I was sort of academically challenged when someone showed me an x-ray and said there was an alien implant in this gentleman's foot.
Sure, yes.
That was a little beyond, I believed in UFOs for many, many years, and obviously somebody's driving them, so they're under intelligent control. And then when the abduction information started coming out, why I was fascinated with that. Also, when looking at John Mack's work and Bud Hopkins and John Carpenter and David Jacobs Yvonne Smith and some of the researchers that were doing that. So I've been very interested in abduction. But it's a leap from there to seeing something in somebody's foot that somebody's calling an alien implant. So I offered to take it out with no charge. And since then, we've done 15 cases where we've removed objects, and we don't charge anything. And we finally were able to form a nonprofit 501c3 organization that would help pay for this. We take donations and et cetera. So we've advanced quite a way since the beginning.
Well, the work that I did with Dr. John Mack and Bud Hopkins back in 1993 with an actual documentary that was done on Forces Beyond was the name of the program, 13-week series on the phenomenon. And the fact that Dr. John Mack had come out and through Harvard University interviewed me as one of the participants in his book with the abduction phenomenon. And truly, that was one of the pioneering steps in now what you're talking about, which is physical evidence of an implant. And what are some of the components that you found, and what actually is it, and what is the purpose of it, in a sense?
Well, you're absolutely correct. People have been looking for physical evidence for years. You know, where's the Holy Grail? Is it a piece of the Roswell craft or a piece of something else? Well, as you mentioned, this is a physical object which you can not only hold in your hand, but you can dissect in many different ways, both biologically and metallurgically, and you can come up with some factual information. So we look at these things, and as any scientific effort would do, you look at them from the outside in. So we look at them macroscopically, you know, what do they look like? 7 are little metallic rods that are about maybe 6 millimeters in length and about the thickness of a pencil lead, and they're covered with this very strange gray sort of biological coating that you can't cut through with a surgical blade. Wow. And then come to find out that this the surrounding tissue shows no rejection or inflammatory reaction to the object. Well, that's, as far as we know, as medical people, is virtually impossible.
That's pretty profound.
Yeah, and so this is a bit of a shock too when you look at these things.
That'd be a stretch for you, I imagine.
Oh, absolute stretch. I mean, in the beginning, I thought, well, it's not the object, it's me, because excuse me, I had been out of school for 25, 30 years. So maybe there's new knowledge, maybe something changed, you know. Right, so right. I had to really go back into the literature and trying to find out what's new in inflammation, what's new in rejection. Come to find out that there wasn't really much new. We know a lot more about it today. We know some of the more complex portions of it in regards to what hormones shift, what attracts the white cells there, the leukokinins and other things that we didn't know years ago. But the basic process has not changed. It's the same.
Yeah, so the body's the body.
Yeah,
right?
The body is the body. The body hadn't changed since I got out of school. So in realizing that, I mean, we really have something here that's quite interesting, to say the least. So, my thought was, my gosh, if we could duplicate this, my God, we'd have a tremendous thing for the medical industry and to give to mankind. If we could duplicate the biological tissue alone, you could wrap a transplant organ in it, or a pin or a screw, put that into the human body, and the patient would not suffer any rejection or have to take immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their life.
So you have actually broken down the scientific evidence that you have is that there is a specific structure, there's an element to it. Can you give us a little bit of the details of what you found so far research-wise? Because this is real hardcore science you're working
on. Oh, this is. And as I said, I am not a scientist. Let me state that out front. So if you don't like the message, don't kill the messenger. Exactly. But my information, all I'm repeating is what scientists tell me or what the data shows. And we find, again, that this biological tissue now, it just doesn't surround the metal, that it's growing from metal. And
growing from
metal. The metal.
Okay.
So we looked at, the possibilities in academia you know, what universities are growing biological tissue from, and there aren't any. You know, as far as black budget is concerned, you know, maybe they are, but we don't know anything about it. Right. So we actually look, you know, with EDX electron microscopy and see that the actual biological tissue is growing out of the metal. I mean, that's a very strange thing. And then we look at the metals themselves, and we find things like elements that are very rare, that you don't find on Earth laying around, like iridium. Iridium has a small percentage of the Earth's crust, but it's very, very difficult to come in contact with. You find that in one of these objects. It's in an abductee's body. You find meteoric iron, you know, in combinations with other things, structures such as nanocarbon tubes, nanocarbon fibers, orthorhombic sodium chloride crystals that are rectangular and varying in size. And you look at these things and you check not only magnetic fields but radio emissions and find that they do emit radio waves. We have something here that's a device. It's a manufactured device, and it's evidently a manufactured device for a specific purpose and not manufactured by our culture.
So what is the purpose? What do you think the actual purposes of these particular devices?
To you know, address the purpose, you really have to go back to the abduction scenario itself. And we know that, that all over the world, most abduction scenarios are the same.
Very similar.
See, you know, the same guys, the Greys, the Nordics, et cetera, and most involve, as you know, Bud Hopkins will tell you, or David Jacobs, involve the taking of ova and sperm. Well, I don't think they're taking ova and sperm to make omelets. You know, they've got to have some purpose for it. So this is the basic thing that we do on our level of scientific development when we want to do something genetic. So it looks like something genetic is going on.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. And when you're out there without care, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough. I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly. And I hope that you are having the time of your life. But think twice. That's my only advice. Come on now, who do you think you are? Bless your soul. You really think you're in control? Well, I think you're crazy. I think you're crazy. I think you're crazy. Just like me. My hero had the heart to lose the lives I wanna live. And all I remember is thinking I wanna be like them. Ever since I was little,